You think you're learning because things look familiar. The page flashes, the formula rings a bell, and you nod along in class. But here's the punchline: you're not learning. You're recognizing patterns, like a parrot repeating words it doesn't understand. Let's cut through the noise. Your brain loves shortcuts. It rewards you for recognizing the shape of a word, the color of a diagram, the echo of a process you've seen before. It's like walking through a haunted house with the lights on. You see all the props, but you never feel the fear. Recognition is surface level. It's seduction without substance. Imagine you're trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle, but instead of fitting the pieces together, you just arrange them by color. It looks neat, but you haven't solved anything. That's what most students do: arrange facts by similarity, never connecting them to the mechanism beneath. The pain comes later, when the test, the project, or real life demands action, and your mind serves up static instead of solutions. Here's the bitter irony: the more you recognize, the more confident you feel. It's a cognitive mirage. The brain confuses recognition with understanding, and you mistake the comfort of the familiar for mastery. But comfort is the enemy of growth. This isn't just your problem. It's built into the culture of how you're taught to learn. Read, highlight, recite. You become a collector of facts, not a creator of knowledge. You decorate your mental bookshelf, never opening the books. When challenge arrives, the shelf collapses. That's the frustration you feel. Hours spent, nothing sticks. Panic sets in when you're forced to use what you know. But here's the deeper trap. Every time you reread a page or watch a video and feel that sense of recognition, your brain gives you a dopamine hit. It feels productive, but it's an illusion. You're mistaking activity for progress. It's like running on a treadmill and expecting to reach a new city. You sweat, you tire, but you stay in the same place. Feynman called this the illusion of knowledge. It's not just a bad habit, it's a trap. If you want to escape, you must first see the bars. Most never do. They spend years in this loop, mistaking the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. When reality demands substance, they come up empty. So, ask yourself, are you learning or are you just recognizing? Are you building understanding or just stacking flashcards? The answer determines whether you'll ever break out of neutral. If you want to join the minority who study to understand, not just to pass, subscribe. You're about to see the world through a different lens. Imagine you're in a dark room, tracing shapes on the wall with your finger. You see a circle, a square, maybe a triangle. But the moment someone turns on the lights, you realize those shapes were just shadows, distorted, incomplete, nothing like the real objects casting them. That's how Richard Feynman saw most people's learning: shadow games. He couldn't stand the pretense. He noticed that students, brilliant on paper, could recite formulas, recognize famous diagrams, but fell apart when asked to explain why any of it mattered or how it worked in the real world. To Feynman, recognizing the shape was not the same as holding the object. There's a story from his time at Princeton. Feynman's classmates would memorize thick stacks of equations before exams. They'd walk around, heads low, mouthing terms like a mantra. But Feynman, he'd ask, what actually happens if I change this variable? What does this equation mean? He'd break down problems to simple, almost childish questions. While others worshipped the symbols, he demanded to see the mechanism behind them. He once sat in a seminar where a student flawlessly recited Maxwell's equations. The room nodded in approval. Feynman raised his hand. But what does this term represent physically? If I change the magnetic field, what do you expect to see? Silence. The student could recognize, but not reason. Feynman's face would twist into that half-smile, half-grimace. He'd seen the trick before. He believed that true understanding was like being able to rebuild a radio from spare parts, not just naming the components. If you only know the names, you're lost when a wire comes loose. If you understand the function, you can improvise, repair, innovate. One day he was challenged. Feynman, you're wasting time with these basics. Just learn the formulas. His answer? If I can't explain it simply, I don't understand it. Not, I don't remember it, I don't understand. Feynman's lens was unforgiving. Are you just painting by numbers, or do you see the structure beneath? Are you parroting shadows, or can you reconstruct the object with your own hands? He didn't care for academic theater. For him, knowledge wasn't about passing exams or impressing professors. It was about being able to play with ideas, to take them apart and put them back together, to use them in a way that mattered. He wanted to see if you could take a principle and apply it to a new situation, not just recite it back in the same context. Most people settle for recognition. Feynman wanted transformation. He wanted to see the gears turning, the connections forming, the moment when a concept becomes a tool you can wield, not just a word you can repeat. But here's the error everyone makes: mistaking the comfort of familiarity for mastery. Feynman called this the illusion of knowing. It's the difference between seeing a shadow and holding the object in your hand. And until you make that leap, you're just wandering in the dark, tracing outlines that never become real. Your brain isn't a filing cabinet. It's more like a tangled forest. When you read, highlight, or passively review, you're just walking the same old path through the trees, trampling the grass, smoothing the dirt, but never venturing off the trail. Recognition is the path. Understanding is the map of the entire forest. Neuroscience shows this. When you simply recognize information, your brain lights up the same way it does when you see an old friend in a crowd. Familiar, yes, but do you really know them? Can you predict how they'll react, what they care about, what they'll do next? Probably not. Recognition is shallow. It's a neural shortcut, efficient but unreliable. Here's the trap. Traditional studying is built on recognition. Rereading, highlighting, cramming, these make you feel productive. Your eyes glaze over the words, your mind whispers, I know this. But in reality, you've built a house of cards. The moment the test, or real life, gives you a gust of wind, it all collapses. Feynman saw this in academia. Students could recite equations but couldn't explain why. They memorized the labels, mistook names for understanding. He called out the emptiness. You can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but you'll know nothing about the bird. But here's the kicker. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. It loves shortcuts. Recognition feels easy because it is easy. But deep learning, real understanding, demands you blaze new trails, form new connections, test and challenge what you think you know. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a dark room and someone flashes a picture of a chair. You see it for a second and then it's gone. Later, if someone asks, was there a chair? You'll probably say yes. That's recognition. But if they ask you to build that chair from scratch or explain how it supports weight, you're lost. That's the gap between seeing and understanding. Traditional education rarely asks you to build the chair. It's obsessed with flashcards and repetition. It rewards quick recall, not deep reasoning. You get points for regurgitating facts, not for wrestling with the messy, uncomfortable process of making sense of them. The system is optimized for speed, not substance. But here's the error everyone makes. They confuse the ease of recognition with the effort of mastery. Your brain rewards you for the shortcut, but punishes you later with failure when you need to actually use the knowledge. This is why so many people feel blindsided in exams, interviews, or real-world problems. The comfort of recognition is a false friend. If you want to break free from the trap, you need more than repetition. You need to destroy the illusion and build real, lasting connections. True learning is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront confusion, to wrestle with uncertainty, to reshape the forest instead of just wandering through it. Only then do you move from the shadow to the object itself. Here's the principle Feynman hammered into every page of his notebooks. Naming something is not understanding it. Imagine looking at a circuit board. You can point at the resistors, the capacitors, the transistors. You know their names. But do you truly know what happens when the electricity races through? Or do you just recognize the pieces, like a tourist reciting street names without knowing where any of them lead? Feynman called out this confusion relentlessly. He said, "I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. It's the difference between reading the label on a box and actually opening it to see how the gears mesh. Names are shortcuts, mental post-its. They're useful, but they offer zero substance. The brain loves shortcuts because they cost less energy. But shortcuts build fragile knowledge. When you're faced with the unknown, an exam, a real problem, a new situation, the shortcuts collapse. Here's the neurobiology. When you only name and recognize, your brain lights up the pattern-matching networks. This is fast, automatic, shallow. For deep learning, you must activate the networks for meaning-making, regions that connect, question, simulate, and predict. That's the true work. Feynman's approach was to press beyond the label, asking endlessly, but why? How does this work? What would happen if I change this? Picture it. You don't just see the map, you start to redraw it. You don't just memorize the sequence, you feel the logic that shapes it. This is what Feynman did with physics, and what you must do with anything you want to truly master. But here's the error everyone makes. You stop when the pattern feels familiar. You mistake recognition for comprehension. The brain is lazy by default. It wants the dopamine hit of "I know this" without the metabolic cost of real thinking. But real thinking is metabolic work. It's neurons firing in new combinations, building bridges where there were only islands. It's the difference between walking a well-worn path and hacking your way through the undergrowth to make a new one. Feynman's genius was his refusal to settle for the familiar. He would take a concept, say the principle of least action, and refuse to move on until he could explain it in his own words, with his own analogies, as if teaching it to a child. He didn't care about sounding smart. He cared about being clear, even if that meant admitting ignorance. That's the fundamental principle. Understanding is the ability to reconstruct, to manipulate, to predict, not just to name. So, the next time you're tempted to move on because you recognize something, stop. Ask yourself, could I explain this to someone who knows nothing? Could I build it from scratch, without the labels? If the answer is no, you're still on the surface. Dig deeper. That's the only way to move from a collector of names to an architect of understanding. Here's the blueprint. Take any concept you think you've learned. Strip away the jargon. Now, grab a blank sheet, a real one, not a mental note. Write the idea as if you're explaining it to a 12-year-old who's never seen the topic. No shortcuts, no memorized definitions. Lay it out step by step, using plain language and simple logic. Imagine you're rebuilding an engine, not reading the manual. Each part must fit because you understand what it does, not because you remember where it sits in the diagram. If you get stuck, that's the fracture point in your knowledge. Don't gloss over it. Go back to your materials, find what you missed, and rewrite the explanation until it's seamless. This is the Feynman technique. Identify the cracks, not the wallpaper. Most people spend years wallpapering over gaps. You're doing surgery. It's slow at first, but your foundation becomes unshakable. You'll see the difference the next time you face a problem. Instead of panicking when the question changes, you'll adapt. Why? Because you don't need the usual cues. You understand the machinery underneath. Here's the analogy. Recognition is like having a stack of flashcards. You flip one over, see a word, and your brain lights up with familiarity. But if someone steals the flashcards, what do you have? Understanding is different. It's like having the blueprint of the machine. If someone takes away the parts, you can still rebuild it from scratch because you know how it works. Apply this daily. After reading a chapter, pause. Grab your sheet, explain the core ideas in your own words. Identify the gaps, return, reinforce, and repeat. This is how you escape the trap of recognition and step into the territory of true learning. You're not just passing a test, you're rewiring your brain for mastery. But here's the error everyone makes. They confuse the speed of recognition with the depth of understanding. The brain loves shortcuts. It rewards you with a hit of confidence every time you recognize a term or formula. But confidence is not competence. Feynman called this the illusion of knowledge, believing you know simply because you can name. So after you write your explanation, challenge yourself. Can you connect this idea to something you already know? Can you use an analogy from a different field? If you're learning about electricity, can you compare it to water flowing through pipes? If you're studying evolution, can you relate it to how languages change over time? This cross-linking is the acid test. If you can't do it, you're still memorizing, not understanding. And don't stop at the easy parts. The real test is whether you can explain the exceptions, the edge cases, the weird scenarios. That's where true understanding lives, at the boundaries, not the center. Feynman himself would obsess over the places where things didn't fit the pattern. He knew that's where the breakthroughs hide. So make this your ritual. After every study session, teach the concept to an imaginary audience. If you stumble, don't move on. Hunt down the gap, patch it, and try again. Over time, you'll notice something strange. You'll start to crave the moments when you get stuck, because you'll know that's where the learning actually begins. But here's the error that almost everyone makes next. You've just found the gap. Now your brain whispers, "It's fine, you basically know it. Move on." That's not curiosity talking, that's ego. That's self-preservation disguised as progress. Picture this. You're walking through a dark tunnel, flashlight in hand. Each time you hit a wall, your instincts scream, "Turn around, find another way." But Feynman would tell you, the wall is exactly where you dig. Most people, though, retreat. Why? Because confronting ignorance feels like failure. Your mind, desperate for comfort, prefers pattern recognition. It wants to see something familiar and call it understanding. This is intellectual laziness dressed up as progress. You skim a chapter, see a familiar formula, and your brain lights up. "I've seen this before." That's not learning. That's just recognition. It's the academic equivalent of mistaking a photograph for the place itself. You can describe the picture, but you've never felt the wind, never heard the sounds, never walked the terrain. You're mistaking the map for the territory. Feynman called this the illusion of knowing. It's the trap that keeps you average. You pass tests by regurgitating terms, but collapse when asked to solve a real problem. You're building a mental museum. Rooms full of labels, but all the doors are locked. You can recite the names, but you can't open a single exhibit. The ego hates blank spaces. It craves completion, even if it's fake. So you rush past the hard questions, avoid the uncomfortable silences, and settle for half answers. You worship speed over substance. But ask yourself, what would happen if you paused at every unknown? If you stared at your ignorance until it blinked first? Here's the epiphany. The obstacle isn't the gap itself. It's your refusal to admit the gap exists. The mind rebels against true effort. It's easier to pretend. But the people who change the world, the Feynmans, aren't faster, just more honest. They linger in confusion until it becomes clarity. They're willing to look foolish in the short term to become wise in the long term. But here's another trap. Sometimes you'll convince yourself that you're being thorough, when in fact you're just circling the same safe territory. You're polishing what you already know because it feels good. That's ego again, afraid of the discomfort of not knowing. The real work is in the places that make you sweat, where your explanations fall apart, where you have to admit, "I don't get it yet." So the real enemy isn't difficulty, it's the voice that says, "Close enough." Silence that voice. Stay with the unknown. That's where the breakthrough lives. If you can learn to see your ignorance not as a weakness, but as a compass, you'll find yourself drawn to the very places others avoid, and that's where real understanding is forged. Picture your mind as a particle accelerator. Most people just let the same old particles, bits of information, circle endlessly, tracing familiar orbits. They see patterns, feel a flicker of recognition, and call it learning. But you're not content with the comfort of repetition. You want collisions. You want to smash those particles together, break them open, and see what's really inside. That's where new elements are discovered. That's where genuine understanding is born. Here's the shift. This isn't about passing exams or impressing others. It's about rewiring how you approach every problem, every conversation, every decision. When you stop mistaking recognition for understanding, you start to see the world's invisible traps. The job interview that asks for insight, not buzzwords. The project that demands synthesis, not regurgitation. The relationship that requires you to actually listen, not just nod and repeat. Suddenly, you realize superficial knowledge is everywhere, but deep understanding is rare. Feynman saw this everywhere. He treated every new field as unexplored territory: physics, biology, even art and music. He didn't care about status or credentials. He cared about whether he could explain it to a child or to someone outside the field. If he couldn't, he knew he didn't really understand it yet. That's why he was relentless in his curiosity. He asked questions others were afraid to ask. He challenged the obvious. He refused to hide behind jargon or authority. Apply this lens to your own life. Suddenly, you spot the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing the thing itself. You realize that in business, creativity, even daily problem solving, the ability to break concepts down to first principles is a superpower. It lets you build solutions that last, because you're not patching holes, you're re-engineering the foundation. You become the person who sees what others miss, who asks the questions that matter, who finds the cracks in the logic before they become disasters. But here's the error everyone makes. They compartmentalize. School is for learning, work is for doing, life is for living. Feynman destroyed that illusion. He was the same curious, relentless mind across every domain. He didn't switch off his curiosity when he left the lab. He brought it to every dinner conversation, every hobby, every challenge. That's why his impact was exponential. He wasn't just a physicist, he was a universal problem solver. If you shift to this mindset, nothing is off limits. You stop fearing new challenges because you know the method. You don't settle for pattern matching because you crave the real mechanics. You become immune to the illusion of competence. You start to crave the feeling of not knowing because you know that's where the next breakthrough is hiding. This isn't just a study hack, it's a life upgrade. It's the difference between skating on the surface and diving to the depths, between echoing what you've heard and creating something truly new. So, ask yourself, where else in your life are you just recognizing patterns instead of understanding? Where are you mistaking familiarity for mastery? The moment you stop accepting the illusion, you start building the kind of mind that can change not just your grades or your job, but the entire trajectory of your life. Here's your new model. Treat every concept like a machine. Don't just memorize its shape, open it up, take it apart, and see what makes it tick. Feynman never settled for the surface. He'd poke, prod, and ask, if I change this lever, what moves? If I remove this gear, what breaks? That's how you convert passive recognition into active understanding. Let's make this visual. Imagine you're staring at the dashboard of a spaceship. Lights blink, gauges move. Pattern recognition lets you spot when something looks off, but it won't help you land the thing if an engine fails. Only real understanding, knowing what each button does, how the systems interact, gives you control when it matters. Most of the world sits in the cockpit, staring, hoping nothing goes wrong. You're learning to fly. This isn't just about school or work or exams. It's about agency. When you understand, you gain leverage over problems. You stop being a passive observer and become an active builder. The world is full of people stuck on autopilot, following scripts they never questioned. Break the script. Open the box. Ask the questions no one else dares to ask. Feynman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Don't settle for the comfort of recognition. Demand the discomfort of discovery. Replace the illusion of learning with the rigor of real inquiry. But here's the catch. This mindset isn't a one-time switch. It's a habit you build, one concept at a time. Every time you catch yourself nodding along, pause. Ask, could I explain this to a child? Could I rebuild this from scratch? If not, you're still in the cockpit, watching the lights, not flying the ship. This is the Feynman mind shift. It's not just a technique, it's a philosophy. It means you refuse to be satisfied with surface-level answers. You demand to know what's underneath, how things connect, why they work. You become the person who doesn't just recite formulas, but can derive them. Who doesn't just recognize a solution, but can invent one. If this video turned even one rusty gear in your mind, imagine what happens when you rebuild the whole engine. Inscribe this habit in your thinking. Make it your default mode. Because the next leap doesn't come from seeing more patterns, it comes from understanding what they mean and how to change them. If you felt that shift, subscribe. The next episode isn't just more information, it's the next gear in the machine, the one that makes everything else move. Don't just watch, transform. That's the Feynman way.